How many of you recognize this sound? How many of you recognize this voice?
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
And I'm sure all of you understand the significance of cookies and milk. Well, all of these things remind us of Santa Claus, but the question is why? And as for myself, I've always been a huge fan of Christmas season. From the falling snow to the beautiful Christmas lights, setting up the Christmas tree, and of course, getting the presents, which is obviously the best part. On top of that, I am also a believer in Santa Claus. Not the typical Santa Claus with the red coat that you're thinking. Instead, I want to show you the Santa that I believe in. Now, I'm sure every one of you has wondered, at least once in your life, why is Santa so famous? Why does he represent Christmas? Well, today I'm going to answer that question once and for all. I'm going to talk to you about how Santa Claus came to be. We're going to discuss his origins, his significance, and how he became famous. So let's ready the reindeer and hop in Santa's sleigh, because we're going all across the world to where things first began. Now, according to the Coca-Cola article titled The Definitive History of Santa Claus, this takes us to where things began in what's known today as modern-day Turkey and Demre. In 280 AD, Santa Claus was born here. Later in his life, he moved to Myra, which is a village in the mountains, where he then became the bishop of this people. So he led a kind and generous life, and in between 326 and 341 AD, he passed away. Now, the question is, who is he based off? Well, I'm sure everyone here has heard the name Saint Nicholas. Well, which is his real name, but how did Saint Nicholas go to Santa Claus? Well, according to Britannical's article entitled Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas in Dutch is actually pronounced Sinterklaas, which I'm sure you can now see the connection. So now that we know Santa's origins and what his name was, let's talk about his significance. St. Nicholas Sender's article, How Did Santa Claus Begin?, talks about a story of a nobleman and his 3 daughters. Back in this day, when a woman wanted to marry, she was required to have a dowry. A dowry is basically a monetary or material possession that is required to be brought into marriage for it to be legal. Now, this nobleman was very poor, and St. Nicholas knew of this, and anonymously, one night, he threw 3 bags of gold through this nobleman's window. And of course, if you got 3 bags of gold thrown through your window at night, you'd wonder who did it, right? Well, eventually St. Nick got tracked down, and from that moment, a lot of charitable donations or gifts were attributed often to St. Nick. And St. Nicholas and the origin of Santa Claus is another piece written by St. Nicholas Center. Talks about how the first Europeans that came to the New World upheld traditions of Santa Claus. Even the Dutch that came to the New Amsterdam, which is now known as New York, also upheld these traditions. However, Puritans did not. Now, even though that the Puritans didn't, his significance was very widespread. In fact, even the Vikings dedicated the Greenland Cathedral to him, and Christopher Columbus himself named a Haitian port after Santa Claus. So I'm sure you can see that he was quite the big deal. Now that we know what his significance is, let's go to the most interesting point of all, which is how he became famous. Now, in National Geographic's article titled From St. Nicholas to Santa Claus, The Surprising Origins of Kris Kringle, it talks to us about 2 men that propelled Santa Claus to red carpet fame, or should I say red-coated. But in reality, a lot of people depicted a man in a red coat bringing gifts. However, it wasn't until 1822 that Clement Moore really made a difference. He wrote a poem that was called A Visit from St. Nicholas to his 6 children. Today, it's better known as The Night Before Christmas. Well, he had no intentions of publishing this poem, but anonymously, in the year to come, it was actually published. Now, it was still up to much interpretation, because in this poem, he depicted Santa as riding in a sleigh, being carried by 8 reindeer, but it left out the style and size. Well, that's when Thomas Nast comes in. He was a political cartoonist that drew Santa Claus in the late 18th century. In 1863, 21-year-old Nast, drew Santa Claus bringing gifts to the Civil War soldiers. He mixed Clement Moore's poem with Uncle Sam to create a Star-Spangled Santa. Well, this boosted the spirits and morale of Civil War soldiers and civilians alike, so that they knew even in hard times they could feel the Christmas spirit. Well, that then reverted back to the red wool coat that we know in today. In the mid-1800s, however, Santa had bishop robes with a pointy hat, long coat, straight beard, and was even depicted as being tall. In 1920, that's when things actually got solidified for Santa Claus, though. Coca-Cola made an advertisement depicting Thomas Nast's drawing with a model that showed him drinking Coca-Cola. So that popularized Santa, and nowadays you find him in your local mall. But in 1931 to 1964, he was shown delivering and making toys for children, reading letters, and even visiting with the children that would stay up into the early morning hours just to meet Santa. So, when you piece together Thomas Nast's drawing, Clement Moore's poem, and the influence of Coca-Cola, you get a jolly, cookie-loving Santa who rides in a sleigh that's led by 8 reindeer that goes down your chimney and leaves gifts to everyone in the world. The transition from St. Nick to Santa Claus really is an interesting one. Now that you have all the pieces of the Christmas puzzle, let's see what we discussed. We've talked about the origins of Santa Claus, his significance, and also what led him to fame. Now when you hear the sleigh bells ringing, or you hear Santa's iconic greeting, or even set out a plate of cookies and milk, you'll know exactly why it's so special. Thank you.